Red and yellow, black and pink, the world has brought us to the brink. It's no use, don't think, just remember, and send the link. That's not exactly a mantra, but we'll have to do. It's hard to talk about race in dialogue with other races. I haven't done that yet. So this is a monologue directed in that direction. This time I want to talk about blacks and black and white and tan. And I should start by saying that I'm not sure I even believe in race as a non-social factor, as not a physical factor. You know, the problem with race is there are three things, right? There's race, there's language, and there's culture. And most of the clashes are culture clashes. But they use the external signs of skin to differentiate the actors in the cultural clashes. And our task is to disengage the clashes and start communicating. So this is a small effort in that regard. When I think about differences among humans, I don't think about race right away. You know, race, of course, is a very important social category, and it structures our behavior and our perceptions and all that. But basically, I think we're a whole series of biochemical types. And if I think of compatibility, I find that I have affinity or erotic attraction or both to people depending more on their biochemistry than on their so-called race. I have great affinity, affection, and some eros with some Black people, and I have non-affinity with quite a few white people. They're just not on my biochemical wavelength. So when you talk about compatibility, I don't know exactly how that works, but you can get great contrast. I remember seeing couples where he was very Black and she was practically albino. And it worked. I mean, they were happy together, amazing. So how exactly the biochemistry works, of course, is unknown. And thinking in that way dissolves a lot of the culture clashes that happen. Each ethnicity has its own set of coordinates, its own way of hypnotizing its inhabitants, right? And our task, again, is to wake up from the hypnosis, whether it is social or cultural or religious or whatever the conditioning is. If we're going to move forward in our spiritual evolution, we have to break some of our conditioning, as much of it as we can reach. So we're conditioned by our race. Again, cultural, there's some interesting linguistic phenomena happening, like there's a tribe of Black Indians in Belize. They're called the Garifuni. And they jumped a slave ship in the Caribbean, and the Indians took them in. And by the next generation, they were Black Indians. You know, they spoke, I think it was an Athabascan language, I'm not sure. So here you have Black people running around speaking a foreign tongue, in this case, Native American. In the case of most Black people that I know, their first language is English. And then, of course, there's a matter of slang. And it's hard to construe what some of those things are. Myself, I can tolerate short people. And tolerance is an absolute essential. Mutual respect is an absolute essential. So we have the tools to communicate. Great. Let's see how they work. This is a pretty narrow platform, but I'm enjoying it. The matter of affinity, as I say, goes across color lines, which is really sociological code for a whole different ethnicity. And we have to realize that that's the case. I remember one time wandering around Long Beach, and I was in a unfamiliar neighborhood, and along comes an old black man on a bicycle, and we had affinity, but we didn't speak. And he rode off, and I could realize, okay, this is the boundary of the black neighborhood. I'm at the edge of the ghetto, and you don't go into the ghetto lightly, especially if you're white. I had a nice experience at one time. I was looking for a particular lecture that I wanted to go to, and it was on North Figueroa, I think it was. And I ended up on, this is in LA, and I ended up on the RTD, and I got the address, but it was on South Figueroa. And I was in the middle of a black neighborhood. So the bus wasn't going to come back this way for a while. I went into a bar, and that was the right bar to go into. A whole room full of black men, middle-aged and old. They were surprised to see me. We didn't engage much, but there wasn't any hostility either. And so I enjoyed my beer and kind of picked up on the vibe, the ambiance, even though I didn't, as I say, engage with anybody at that point. Then I got back on the bus and rode to North Figueroa, where I was going. Nice experience. There were some other not so nice experiences. One time when I was a monk, I was in a park in San Francisco and encountered a bunch of teenage black kids in a raunchy mood, and I wasn't in my monk's robes, I was in civvies. But they surrounded me and robbed me. I think I had a nickel or something. But they also took my address book, and I hope somebody made use of it, because it contained the address of what was called the Tara Cultural Institute in India. And I wanted to connect up with them. So I lost their address. And I don't remember if I had a wallet or what was in it. That was gone. And surprisingly enough, it was a mixed group, at least one woman. And while this was going on and they were deciding to what extent they wanted to bother me anymore, a young woman came up and we stood face to face, rapport, right? And she quietly handed me my keys back, for which I was very grateful. And she did it smoothly, in the flow of what was going on. Meanwhile, another lifesaver, some fitness dude comes running through, and he looks at the situation and says, "The police are coming," and runs off. Probably saved my bacon. You never know for sure. So that's not a color issue. That's a cultural thing. I remember being in New York City one time. I walked around the corner and there was 6 or 7 white guys looking kind of street rough. Even though I was a total dumb bunny at the time, I dead stopped and backed around the corner really fast so they didn't see me. So I didn't have to engage a group of rowdy teenagers. So there you go. Again, the Black culture, as I look at it, boggles me. There are quite a few beautiful features to it that anybody can appreciate, even non-Blacks. Of course, there's the music, and there's the style. being relaxed under every situation, having physical alert relaxedness, very casual all the time or whenever possible. You know, every once in a while I try to emulate that if I notice my hypertonicity is acting up. So I learn to loosen up. And there are other kind of things that you can learn. And I had linguistic training, so I'm interested in speech, and Black speech is totally astounding. You know, the dialect is based in Gullah, which was spoken in the South during the slave era. And Gullah was a mixture of West African words and English words and a lot of West African thinking concepts. And it's beautiful. You know, it reminds me of Yiddish in a way because it's a mixture of languages. And of course, the dialect can speak easily in code, and sometimes that's necessary too. You know, that we're all an endangered population now, and now it's coming out of the woodwork. And you know, look at the situation in the Black ghettos, and it's totally unacceptable to everybody. And that's progress, at least. I see somebody coming down the sidewalk, and if it's a male, you know, I check them out. Is there any danger here? If it's Black male, I look twice. Is there any danger here? And usually there isn't. My mama worked for the state cops. She was a secretary. She was good at what she did. But I got a lot of cop stuff brought home that none of us knew anything about yet. That was a digression. I have another strange memory from San Francisco. I'm walking along Mission Street, you know, probably in La La Land. I have a lot of fantasies and imagination and ideas to mull over. And I hear a harsh voice from the stairs over there. And there's this big Black dude sitting on the top of the stairs, surrounded by a retinue of maybe 8 or 10 people. And, you know, he was the king, right? You know, the phrase, how can we sing King Alpha's song in a strange land? And the memory of the strangeness of the land and the suffering of the slave boats and the slave plantations and all that is still transmitted and understood and dealt with, and it's a wound, and it can be healed. And in fact, many have already healed that wound. Anyway, the guy was pretty aggressive and said some things I didn't understand. And I just kept walking, you know, the old girl's trick, right? You pretend that that's not happening, right? And I'm walking along, and one of the girls that was in his retinue came up to me and said, he called you out, you have to go back, which was good information. It was, of course, true. And so I went back and faced him, and there was an interchange there. And I don't even remember what all was said, but basically, what little white boy are you doing in my territory? And I didn't have a good answer. So the interchange continued a while, and the retinue was all being there. And so the interview ended, and I started to walk away and kept walking. And the dude threw an empty beer bottle. And I could feel it graze the top of my head and smash on the sidewalk in front of me. And I did all I could do. I kept walking at the same pace. But if that wasn't a little reminder, hey, there's a world up here going on with King Alpha and retinue that you don't know nothing about. And there's a lot when you interact with the Black community, a lot of, you don't know nothing about it. I had a very excellent experience one time when I was a hippie. A bunch of us hippies got invited to a Black ghetto. And I was one of the ones that took them up on it. There were probably 4 or 5 of us or so. And they kept us protected. You know, we were not in safe territory, but you don't mess with those white folks, they're our guests. And they were able to make that stick. So then we had this constant adventure of interacting, and this went on for days. I'm reminded to talk about mixing. Yeah. What all did I see in there? A Stoneman. When it comes to mixing it up, there was a group of us, probably about a dozen, blacks and whites, men, and we're walking to the ghetto's edge. And you got to know where the boundary of the ghetto is, so you know where you are. And we were past the boundary, we were walking around, I don't remember what we were doing. And we drew a few squad cars that day. And it was all automatic on the up and up. It was okay. They checked everybody's ID. Everybody was okay. And they didn't lean on us at all. You know, they just did their job, which was to check out an unusual group. But there's where the systemic racism begins to play a part. It's hard for a white guy to have black friends, you know, and especially if it's not a token thing. And I don't have any black friends right now. It makes me sad. I think the gap has been widening, and now it's now everything is incredibly in motion. My last black friend was a fellow alcoholic named Jeff, and we hung out together. We had a good friendship, but we didn't meet often. His wife, who was white, was very possessive of him. It was sad. In fact, he called me up one time, can I come over and stay with you? He was having a fight with her. I said, sure, come on over. And he ended up patching up the fight, didn't have to. Another time we're hanging out in a fancy dessert place with our coffee and chocolate, right? Sitting on an outside table and being outrageous. It was fun. But for me, there was a limit. My natural caution, believe it or not. I've done a lot of risky things, so you learn to use caution and keep your security cushion intact. And sometimes you get out of your comfort zone. I had a black friend in the 60s. We were hanging out a bit, and we were in the international district, and he wanted to get a bottle of wine in a paper sack and sit on a doorstep, which is standard behavior if you're in the ghetto, right? And I just didn't have the nerve. You know, I was already having a bit of a drinking problem for one thing. And for another thing, the image that we would present is striking, and it's too rare. You know, one-on-one friendships between blacks and whites, it happens, but it's rare. And, you know, it does stand out a little bit if that's going on. I remember one time standing with a good-looking black woman at a taxi stand waiting for a taxi. I mean, you can connect the dots on that one. And the taxi didn't come for an hour. Nobody batted an eye. I had met her in a bar. She asked me to buy her a beer, and I was flattered that a good-looking black woman would take any interest at all in me. And of course, when we started our conversation, it became obvious she was turning tricks. And I had some money from the welfare department, right? And so I could afford a reasonable price. And so we're at the taxi stand, and It was beautiful interaction. We were straight up with each other. You know, there were no hidden agendas there. She said she wanted out of the business. I was not in a position to help her do that, but I hope she got her wish. You know, because she was a very talented young woman in many ways, of course. Uh, anyway, again, it's unusual to have blacks and whites just hanging out. And of course, since the outbreak, since the COVID era started, everything has changed that way. Um, and I haven't been in the streets for the demonstrations, but I'm sure glad to see that it's happening finally. You know, I had a rather deep sense of failure with the hippie movement when we got basically crushed by the system and failed to bring peace, joy, and happiness to everyone, which was the ultimate goal, I think. And of course, we had a lot of black culture, especially via the music. As hippies, we listened a lot to Mississippi Delta blues, Mississippi John Hurt, and Robert Johnston, and other such. I did a little paper in high school about black poets, and that was a real eye-opener. Can't go into detail there, but it affected me, that sensibility. It slowly begins to dawn on me, hey, this is a real different perspective. And, you know, all I can do here is share my real different perspective in the hopes that somebody will pick up on something useful for them themselves. When I was in the ghetto as a hippie guest, I saw people that don't get out of the ghetto much, if at all. You know, unusual types, or physically unusual, yeah. Big guys. Or little guys, like there was that kid, he was probably 12, he was gangster dressed in the, I guess it was a bar. They had a jukebox. I couldn't read the fucking jukebox, of course. And I, of course, hadn't heard the songs before. So it was a real learning experience in a whole lot of ways. I had a friend in there, his name was Champ. He'd been a heroin addict and he kicked it, which was no mean accomplishment, to say the least. A very gentle and sweethearted person. In fact, we even shared a white woman. She was a hippie and was game for experimentation. I heard later she became a Hare Krishna. I was glad for her. But, you know, that bonded us too. And then I got back to Seattle and I got a postcard from him from the jail. And I don't remember what the circumstance was, but I sent him back a card saying, I really wish you the best, man. And I really meant it. But there you go. He was washing windows for a living. So you got all of the systemic impossibilities. You know, what are you going to do? Who are you going to use for a role model? And, you know, that's been answered. It's all over popular culture now. They even slowed down hip hop enough that us old geezers can understand it. Amazing. You know, poetry on the fly, you could call it. I'm going to end this rather than stick my foot in it anymore. I hope I didn't offend anybody. You know, I hope somebody from both sides of the street might happen to see this thing. And if not, I at least got it out. I'm learning to love everybody, even those guys on the other side that are trying to create a totalitarian system of one sort or another. Enough said. Take care, be well, stay safe, all that. Checking out.